Welcome to the How I Started Career Stories podcast, where we will interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, and company leaders to hear how they got to where they are on their career journey. We'll talk about the early days, the setbacks, the risks they took, and ultimately how they're using their learnings now and into the future. I'm Andrew Kappel, your host. Let's get started with this week's episode. All right, welcome to an episode of the How I Started podcast. It's informal Fridays for, the podcast episode comes out on Fridays, so we're good. And we're also recording on a Friday here in end of February. And Brad is down in a much warmer part of the country than I am. And so without further ado, Brad, welcome to How I Started. Let's hear a little bit of background, some of the early days, and go from there.
Yeah. Good to be here, Andrew. So early days, when I was in college, I was here at College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina, and I met the CEO of a company called PeopleMatter. He lived across the street from my friend, and I was over at a dinner party, and he walked across with his two dogs and was just this loud guy, and we started talking, and I ended up joining him for an internship, and it was really special and cool because I got to sit up with the C-level folks and was part of all the executive leadership team meetings, and was helping out with due diligence for acquisitions and merger conversations and managing big consulting firms and doing reorganizations of departments when I was like 21 or 22 years old. So it was really cool from that perspective. And then I ultimately ended up graduating college and then joining the sales team and, started building pipeline, and we were one of the first companies using outreach back in whatever that was, 2016,
15, 16. Yeah, maybe. Wait, did you go to any of the outreach conferences or any of the meetups?
No, so we had a sales enablement guy named Tim Dillon who I ended up working with later at a different consulting firm again, but he was just always kind of on the forefront, and I remember him kind of bringing in outreach to the team, and it was just such a force multiplier for us. I think I added 3x of my quota in like 6 months. And I was like, okay, what do I do now, kind of thing. But it was just such like a cool early access to seeing all this great tech that's out there, and kind of learning about the BDR function. And ultimately that business ended up getting sold. And the CEO actually had a group of franchises that he was a partner in here locally, and asked me to come run the sales motion for them. So I ended up going and leaving that software company to go work at a franchise called CPR Cell Phone Repair,
Okay.
where we were literally fixing people's iPhones and iPads and whatnot. But we had kind of a different structure. We wanted to get to an exit, and it was a very B2C business model. It was like a top 20 franchise at the time, and I didn't really have a lot of B2C experience, but what we'd identified is that there's a huge market in like school districts having tens of thousands of devices, and like a fifth grader drops his iPad, cracks the screen, and then it's not usable. So we ended up getting like 90,000 devices under contract here in like the Tri-County area of Charleston. And, I was literally driving around a little utility van that was wrapped with CPR stuff, picking up iPads. But, when I started, our EBITDA was around 12%, and we got it up to 27% in a year and a half. And then we sold that business for a pretty positive exit. And it was just a really cool experience to, manage hourly employees, deal with complaining customers, have to do retailing, have to, work with businesses, here locally to execute contracts. And, it was kind of a fun, like really significant change of pace for me. And ultimately from there, after we sold it, I went and joined forces with, a guy named Doug that I'd worked with at PeopleMatter, who was the VP of Sales Ops and had started his own consulting firm. So that was kind of my first foray into the consulting world, and was running engagements for RevOps, go to market, building fractional BD teams, working with private equity firms, and that was probably where I got to work with my first 10 to 15 companies, in the kind of like SaaS growth PE scale up world, and it's kind of where I started to love consulting.
Cool. Wow. So yeah, that's really interesting. Most folks, I would say, try to make the transition. Maybe they start off in B2C and like cell phone sales, or working in some sort of technology solution, and then they realize they want to go to B2B. So you were B2B, sort of dipped your toes in the water with B2C, but then immediately you're just like, hey, we're going to roll this up and sell it to school districts and businesses, and so that way you could like anchor back to the more B2B version of it. So yeah, like what was that experience like? Like, did it feel like taking a step back, or were you just like partnered with a leader that you like wanted to learn from, and just you chose the leader over like the business itself?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd say I've been kind of lucky in my life to have kind of like three pretty significant mentors along my path. One of them being Nate, who's the CEO of PeopleMatter. And he brought me into that business. The main partner in that business is a guy named Joe Riley, who had been, the leader, the GM for GE interventional radiology sales in the U.S. So he was like a big time sales guy, knew his stuff inside and out. Still to this day, the best seller I've ever worked alongside. He taught me a large amount of what I know about sales. Don't let my dad hear that. He taught me a lot too. But, I think to answer your question about the B2B, B2C thing, the reason why we really liked the B2B portion in that cell phone repair world was we wanted to be predictable, right? Like,
Yeah.
we can guess how many people are going to walk through the door on a given day with a cracked cell phone, because it's kind of like a funeral home in that there's always going to be business. We knew that for a fact. But, if it rains in retail, like all of a sudden people aren't going to the store,
Right.
So we wanted a way to basically figure out, we have a labor cost issue in retail. A lot of times you're working with hourly workers. Like, how do we fill their downtime? And for us, we had this opportunity to basically be repairing iPads. So if there's not people walking through the front door, there's a stack of stuff that fifth graders have broken in the back of any of our shops. So we always have uptime, and I'm not paying for labor that isn't, doing anything from a throughput perspective for us. So we kind of brought almost like that manufacturing
Assembly, like the factory, and like you had like the front door, and then the back door, and like you were able to kind of pick up the larger bulk shipments and things like that.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Big believer in filling downtime, right? I mean, it's kind of the cost killer of businesses.
Yeah.
And,
That's really interesting. Like, I think of downtime with application performance, but it's kind of the same thing of, you want the labor, your team members to be productive and to be billing. And, that's a whole nother thing, as we're both in the consulting agency, where we run our own businesses now. And so, I don't know if we've jumped into the FTE model, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. And, that becomes a big challenge.
Yeah. No, 100%. Right. It's like in our world, it's like if you're not selling time right now, it's gone. It's out the door. There's a bit of a sunk cost challenge that we run into for sure.
Yeah. Hey, I want to put you on the spot. Are you thinking about building? You've had a great start to the year. We're going to talk about your business. Are you thinking about bringing on FTEs, full-time employee consultants, or are you thinking about continuing with the contractor model, so that way you don't have to worry so much about uptime and downtime because the project base?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think where I'm at right now, I'm not super interested in full-time employees. And to be perfectly frank with you, I think there's two main reasons why. The first is, I'm very much in the RevOps world, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that in a moment. But what I'll say is, when I interview folks, whether it's like a referral or, finding someone on the street that's in RevOps, I just don't know what it means anymore. I think that like sales ops, RevOps, it's all been so watered down where so many of these folks aren't operators, no fault of their own, right? But they've never, created a process from scratch or haven't been in enough scenarios where they know all the different permutations of what something could look like. So I just find it really challenging to find full-time folks that are the right fit for our business and can keep up with the pace of play that I expect. But the second half of this, why I really like contractors, is you and I both get this, but like a lot of the people that are doing a consulting or a contractor type engagement do so because it gives them freedom. One, they can make more money than going and working for someone else. And it tends to be kind of the best of breed folks that are living in that world right now. And they're specialists, right? So depending on what the engagement is, I might be doing something that's super, let's say, Salesforce Service Cloud heavy. And the person's, RevOps might have like maybe worked with Service Cloud one time or, had to toggle some settings on omnichannel, but they don't know how to get in there and build a customer service process that's going to work and function and know all that. A contractor, in my ecosystem likely does because those folks have been vetted, they have all those credentials, they have those certifications, and they're playing the gun for hire game. And know that good work begets more work, and that's the game that we're playing, not job tenure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's just a leverage point or looking back, and like there's risk and there's definitely upside too. But yeah, that's fascinating. So Brad, let's transition. Maybe we'll talk about where we first got to know each other and talk about the journey that you've been up to over the last few years.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, I'd kind of gotten into consulting with some former PeopleMatter colleagues, was doing that kind of part-time for a few years. Along the way, I started a industrial robotic company that we bootstrapped to $3.5 million.
Okay. Side
That's a
quest.
whole
Side quest.
whole nother podcast. Very exciting and fun, putting 6 foot tall robots in manufacturing facilities, working with the Air Force. But where we met.
Wait, we need a little bit more on that. Yeah. You can't just I mean, like, there's a saying with to go viral, you need to have the open loops. You need to close a little bit of that loop.
Yeah. So
you're gonna have people hitting up your DMs to learn all about this.
Yeah. Well, I definitely don't do it anymore, right? I think what I saw, and I'm still really bullish on robotics in America. Like, I think it's a really cool space. I think that, as many industrials are, it's just kind of underserved in that they're not where like the software and services businesses we work with are at, right? Like from a process standpoint, a lot of times it's more like hobbyists and engineers that are running those firms. So from a competitive standpoint, it was really easy to come in and say, hey, we can show up with a better sales model. We can turn around quotes inside of 24 hours instead of 2 weeks, right? And just being better than everyone else, like the bar was just lower in that world. So the cost of acquisition was lower. And, we kind of put together a team of a bunch of folks that know a lot about robotics and were able to be successful there. It was really fun for me because I was able to, my dad's been in the robotics world for about a decade. And so I was able to bring him into that business and work closely with my dad, which was a ton of fun. I think ultimately we all got to a place where the business had made money. It was hard work, a lot of time with a hard hat on and steel tip boots in a factory. And I was ready to get back to consulting, as were the other partners. So, I don't know what that says about consulting. Certainly not easy work either, but that's kind of what ultimately led us together. I'd gotten a call from recruiter who's actually married to one of my contractors now. And she called me about this company called Skaled. And that's where I first met you, Andrew, was working at Skaled together on some projects. Gosh, I don't even know, 2021, maybe 22.
Yeah. Fascinating. So Yeah, you've had, I think, a lot of the zigs and zags. We're going to have to put together like an infographic of your career journey and the different industries. It's going to be really interesting, like 2x2 matrix of like, hey, working in knowledge work and then blue collar work and then retail work and then B2B and like kind of like the zigzag, which is, I think it's really important. You know, one of my favorite things about consulting is we get to work with clients, learn about their business, their industry, their challenges, and then work on solving those challenges. So you get to learn about different business sectors and industries and business models. And you can start to pattern recognize and pattern match and also take best practices from one business sector to another sector. You can't just apply off the shelf solutions. There's a saying of like productize services, like deliver the same thing to everyone. And I don't think it works. I think there was Chris Barnett from Superit. I think he talks about don't productize your services, standardize your delivery. So
Yeah.
make it a excellent experience, surprise and delights, make it transparent and where you're at. Because like no businesses are the same, but you can definitely get patterns and, similarities between them.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you on that. And I think that there's some, rationale to there's a right way to build your sales process or build operational processes. And, there's some kind of rules to live by in those categories. And having seen what works and maybe what doesn't work at 60 different companies, some of which I've owned and been closer to, and some of which I've consulted on. It's you start to learn and develop one that's scar tissue of like, oh geez, I'm not going to make that mistake again. And two, you really understand like, wow, this is a process that's A+, it's working phenomenally. We want to go replicate that and do it in other markets, and bring that best practice in. So yeah, no, I'm with you on that one 100%.
Interesting. So we worked together with Jake and Matt and the team at Skaled, and that was just an amazing experience. The brand that Jake and the Skaled team have put together, the thought leadership, the best practices, and just I think that they've helped give a lot of us so much experience and perspective and the ability to deliver for our customers. So it's exciting that we're both under the Jake coaching tree. And so Brad, what are you up to nowadays?
Yeah, so I started my own firm about this time last year, called Revenue Force. We are very specifically focused on RevOps, and building commercial maturity. So we tend to work with private equity-backed SaaS and services companies. I like to work with private equity-backed companies because they tend to have a mandate for growth and a desire to optimize process, procedure, systems, people. And for me, RevOps is a really kind of important component of building really robust commercial maturity, and building revenue systems that work. So we spend a lot of time with our clients, whether it's Salesforce, HubSpot, implementations, migrations, fractional teams, whether that's admins only, VPs of RevOps, need to build out the function from scratch. And then we also still do some work on building out, teams, BDR teams, AE teams, enablement programs, right? So really anything revenue generating, RevOps, sales ops, MarOps, CS ops. We do a little bit of everything in that world.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a place that you can specialize and niche down. And so you work directly with the private equity at the portfolio level, and then you get to work with their portfolio companies, or what does a typical engagement look like for you?
Yeah, so we work, largely through private equity partners that are bringing us to portfolio companies. We also do, in our business, we get a lot of referrals. So we're pretty heavily a referral business. We don't really do much outbound anymore. And yeah, I mean, our typical work is through a portfolio company where there's a need for some sort of go-to-market value creation initiative. And, sometimes that starts with a small one-off project and expands to, hey, we really needed to do something more here or bring in a team to support ongoing roadmap. And then we do a good amount of kind of front-end assessment of maturities. But, a lot of companies don't know where they should start first from a revenue impact standpoint. It's like there's a ton of things we could do, and we need someone to point us in the right direction of what that order of operations should look like and what is going to make the most impact on the business. And then the other place that we get flagged a lot on is, hey, we just can't figure out our reporting. Everything we do is super reactive. We can't make strategic decisions. We're just trying to maintain the day-to-day. So oftentimes that's a pretty significant trigger to call someone like us and say, hey, we need help. We've got technical debt that we need to resolve, or process debt for that matter.
Makes sense. Cool. Brad, to wrap up, I don't know if we have a rapid fire, but what do you like to do for fun?
Play a lot of tennis these days.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about
That's
pickleball?
right. Well, tennis, pickleball, it's a big rivalry out there. I'm squarely in the tennis side of things. I do occasionally pick up a game of pickleball with some of our, aunts, uncles are in the pickleball world. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, I tend to play more tennis.
Cool. And last question. This is a little bit out of left field because, we know each other pretty well, but not this well. I don't know if you're a Bravo. Do you watch any Bravo shows?
I get sucked into the Bravo shows because they're on sometimes around the house here.
Yeah, same. And I put them on. So, Summer House. Do you know Craig Conover?
I do not. It's been a long time since I've been active in the downtown Charleston bar scene, but I did used to see some of those Southern Charm guys floating around occasionally.
Okay, yeah. Craig is he makes the cameo on Summer House, which is in the Hamptons, but he's situated as an entrepreneur, I think an attorney and a businessman in Charleston. And I think him and Paige just broke up, so yeah, he might be back out there. But I just I figured entrepreneur to entrepreneur in Charleston, you had to know each other, but I guess not.
No, I don't know much about the pillow entrepreneur world here in Charleston.
Oh wow, okay. Well, maybe they need some robotics to optimize the fluffiness.
There you go.
So, all right, we'll wrap it up there. We'll put some information, Brad, about yourself and Revenue Force, and go from there.
Awesome. Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew.
Side note: I'm looking at Craig Conover's Wikipedia. I just knew him as Paige's boyfriend, Craig. His name is Conover. He's got a Wikipedia. I think you need a Wikipedia.
Yeah, maybe that's the next big play for us here. Yeah.
So we'll look out for that.
All right.
All right, later on. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and also share it out on LinkedIn or with friends, colleagues, or classmates who might like the show as well. You can also get the newsletter at leaderlev.com/podcast. You can find that also in the show notes.